Chapter 61, Courting Death. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. And why is he looking at me like that? As he thought about it, Riose felt stranger and stranger. Did something happen to Larry today? Ever since Matthew Merlin entered, he remained oddly silent, and now he is looking at me with such an odd expression. Fuck, it's like he feels sorry for me or something. That idiot Larry must have been hit in the head apostrophe. After worrying over it a bit longer, he concluded, doesn't matter, I can just ignore him. That's right, compensation. Riose temporarily put Larry's strange behavior to the back of his mind as he haughtily looked at Lin Yan. The Gilded Rose's provocation has already gone too far. You have two choices now, either compensation or becoming enemies. I feel that compensation is better. You are clever. Hearing that the other side was willing to settle the matter, a victorious smile appeared on Rio's face. He finally decided to sit down. All this time, he had been standing up so that he could look down at Lin Yan. But Lin Yan's next words left him flummoxed. My requirements are very simple. 200,000 gold for each of the apprentice alchemists, for a total of 1 million. Moreover, I want those stolen goods to arrive at the outskirts of Edgerift before dark. Hold on, the great swordsman had just sat down smugly, but when he heard what Lin Yan was describing as compensation, he felt that it was clearly off. What is this kind of compensation? Well, great swordsman Riose, did you really think that the people of the Gilded Rose could be casually detained? Don't you know? Those 5 people you detained are the Gilded Rose's best apprentice alchemists. Each one of them can bring immense profits to the Gilded Rose. Asking for 200,000 gold for each of them is truly negligible. Larry on the side was covering his forehead, dreading the result that he knew was coming. Hold on, you are saying that you want the Viper Nest to compensate the Gilded Rose with 1 million gold? Riose finally managed to react after processing everything. And if I am Matthew Merlin, you are courting death. Riose jumped up from his seat. His fierce face became somewhat sinister as his scar twisted along with his expression. Riose, don't be impulsive. Larry noticed the situation taking a bad turn and promptly reached a hand out to pull back the great swordsman. Fuck off. How could a 9th rank mage physically stop a great swordsman that was consumed by rage? Seeing Riose raising his hand, Larry retreated close to the wall. Riose immediately grabbed the large magic great sword at his side. His aura rose up and a crack sound came out as the long table was split in half. His rippling aura spread through the reception room like a tornado, crushing chairs into pieces one after the other. This was the strength of a great swordsman. Compared to swordsmen who could only use their bodies to fight, a great swordsman with aura was an existence on a completely different level. An aura trained to the peak had highly destructive power. Even a hard rock wouldn't be much different from tofu when facing the aura of a great swordsman, let alone the furniture. The sword had vividly displayed the might of aura under Rio's rage. But Lin Yan hadn't moved the slightest bit. Those things you broke just now will also be compensated by the Viper Nest. You are courting death. Provoked by Lin Yan's words, the furious Rio's face contorted even further. That long scar became extremely conspicuous as his face became red from anger, looking almost as if a centipede was crawling on his head. The sword that he had lowered after his first slash now rose up once again. Moreover, the target was no longer just the table or those chairs. It was Lin Yan, who was only a few meters away. The surging aura rose up like waves, crazily crashing against everything around. Even the walls of the reception room were letting out a screeching sound as a crack spread across one of the walls. The red aura gathered on the great sword, and with Rio's shout, the great sword slashed down with a thunderous sound. This time, even Larry couldn't help feeling shocked. Although Larry was a 9th rank mage, when facing the aura of a great swordsman going all out like this, he wouldn't be able to resist at all. Even though he was only facing the incidental backdraft from the uncontrolled aura of the great swordsman, Larry could only put up a magic shield to make sure that he wouldn't collapse under the pressure. This wasn't a force that a mage could defend against. Only a great mage could withstand the blow of a great swordsman. The sword filled with aura slashed down while Lin Yan still remained motionless. He only muttered a few syllables, a short incantation. His voice was very low, like he was only mumbling to himself, and it was quite hard to hear in front of that whistling sword. But it was this mumble that suddenly silenced the atmosphere. The great sword that had been slashing down so thunderously came to a sudden stop. It felt as if a huge, invisible hand was in the air, firmly grabbing onto the sword. No, it wasn't only the great sword. Even Ryos, who had been swinging the great sword with a malevolent sneer and surging aura, was now completely still. Only the drops of sweat on his forehead were moving, dripping down to the ground. The strangest part was that even though he wasn't moving, it felt as he was struggling to try to move. The reception room had suddenly become deathly silent. No longer were the great swordsman's bellows roaring out, nor was there the raging aura. It was all replaced by a kind of suffocating pressure, and the source of the pressure was still sitting there. It was the young mage who hadn't moved at all. I said, everything you broke will be compensated for by the Viper Nest. Lin Yun slowly stood up, a smile still plastered on his face, but the way he looked at Ryos made the great swordsman freeze. The look was extremely calm. It wasn't ruthlessly cold, and it wasn't full of emotions. That gaze definitely wasn't a gaze that a living person would use toward another living person. From Ryos' memories, only a ruthless killer would look at a living person like that. Who is this Mafia Merlin? Ryos wanted to ask out loud, but he currently was unable to do anything whatsoever. In fact, after that mumbled incantation, Ryos had been stopped by a power that he couldn't resist at all. That power not only stopped his great sword in the air as it had been slashing down, but it also instantly bound him. He couldn't open his mouth or move his fingers. Although he could still think, he had lost control of his body. The only thing Ryos could do was keep looking on helplessly. Looking at this young man raising his right hand, looking as he slowly made Ryos float into the air. Afterwards, Ryos could only feel an inexorable force slowly clamp around his neck, lifting him higher while tightening its grasp. Ryos wanted to struggle and call for help, but as he was held in place by the huge binding force, he couldn't do anything at all. Despair and fear filled Ryos' thoughts. What about being a great swordsman of the Viper Nest? Everything else was thrown out to the back of his mind at this time. If he could, Ryos would rather never have entered this reception room or raised his great sword. At this moment, Ryos finally realized why Larry's expression had been so strange all along. It was because they were sitting in front of a great mage, one that was powerful enough to kill the great swordsman with a single move. Ryos had raised his sword against this kind of great mage. Ryos wanted to beg for forgiveness, but he couldn't even open his mouth and could only wait as that invisible hand lifted him higher. Ryos could faintly feel dizziness building up from being choked. Death and shadows were continuously approaching. Go back and tell Saus to prepare 2 million gold. Just as Ryos began to feel like he had already died, Lin Yun swung his right hand. In a flash, Ryos was sent flying like a cannonball. The walls of the reception room couldn't withstand that kind of power, and pain jolted through Ryos' body as he crashed through them. After recovering from his daze, Ryos noticed that his surroundings had changed to become the spacious Victorious Return Street. As he regained his awareness, Ryos felt a fierce pain throughout his body, as if every bone had been crushed. He simply couldn't find a spot that wasn't hurting. But Ryos didn't care about that at this moment. He opened his mouth and started to hyperventilate as he suffered from fear and despair. That, Larry, after casually throwing the great swordsman out of the Gilded Rose, Lin Yun looked back at the completely terrified 9th rank mage once again. Startled by his gaze, Larry suddenly jumped up from the ground and quickly rushed to answer. I understand. I'll put everything in order. Good. Chapter 62, Forcing His Way In. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. To Thousand Sails City, the northern Poison Fog Canyon was a true deathly forbidden area. Not only was it filled with a deadly fog all year long, but it also harbored the biggest underground force of Thousand Sails City, the Viper Nest. Even the Monchai family, which supported the Viper Nest, didn't understand why a major force would occupy such a barren land with poor ore veins and poison constantly spreading all about. Moreover, There were all kinds of dangerous magic beasts hidden within the Poison Fog. This was the state of the Poison Fog Canyon. Among the territories occupied by all the various major forces of Thousand Sails City, even if the Viper Nest's Poison Fog Canyon wasn't the very worst one, it was definitely among the worst ones. There was simply no way that such a place could bring in much profit. Moreover, in order to resist the assault of the magic beasts, the Viper Nest would have to keep a lot of manpower tied up every year. But for all these years, the Viper Nest never gave up on that territory. As for the true reason behind this, perhaps only Souse knew. The Poison Fog Canyon had also changed over the course of being occupied by the Viper Nest for 10 years. Many defensive structures were built, sentry post after sentry post, until the Poison Fog Canyon became quite heavily fortified. After passing by the area, even Sasu had cursed, "That bastard Souse is truly a coward." What kind of person was Sasu? He was the leader of the Silvermoon Mercenaries, and was Thousand Sails City's most powerful great swordsman. He had already trained his aura to its peak as early as 3 years ago. It would only take him one more step to enter another realm, joining the ranks of the most terrifying powerhouses. And even he couldn't help smiling bitterly after seeing the Poison Fog Canyon. From this, it was obvious how fearsome the Viper Nest's Poison Fog Canyon was. In a temporary wooden house in the depths of the Poison Fog Canyon. "So you say that this Mafmerlin is a great mage?" Souse asked. He was a short, middle-aged man with a pale face. Upon seeing Souse for the first time, it would be hard for anyone to believe that such an ordinary-looking man was actually in charge of Thousand Sails City's biggest underground force. Yes, Souse was next to a sickbed. The person laying down on the bed was the person who had suffered a huge loss at the Gilded Rose, Rios. This great swordsman no longer had the overbearing attitude that he'd had at the Gilded Rose. He was lying immobile, powerless and covered in thick bandages like a mummy. He is actually a great mage. Seeing a capable subordinate wrapped in bandages like this, Souse couldn't help feeling a bit of a headache. That Maffer had concealed himself too well. He was barely 20, so how could he have been so cautious and patient all this time? If Souse had managed to become a great mage in his 20s, there was no way he would have been able to stop himself from showing off. He definitely would have let the entire Thousand Sails City know of his great achievement. But this Maffer fellow was different. He secretly advanced and became a great mage without letting anyone know. If it wasn't for Rios suffering a dreadful defeat at the Gilded Rose, Souse might have still been in the dark about this, and he would have still thought that the Gilded Rose was a gold mine that could be easily taken. A great mage under 20. That was too incredible. If I had known earlier that the Gilded Rose was overseen by such a powerhouse, I wouldn't have been dumb enough to detain their goods and even send Rios and Larry to negotiate. This was simply sending them to suffer, and I sent both. Damn, how did it end up like this? As he mulled over the situation, Souse truly felt his head throb. If I had known before, I wouldn't have coveted the Hope Potion formula. Now it's too late. I already offended a young great mage. In fact, it wouldn't have been bad if it had been an ordinary great mage. Although the Viper Nest wasn't one of the finest forces in Thousand Sails City and didn't have a powerhouse on the level of Solomon, the 20 years Souse spent working hard to build it up went for nothing. He could come up with 4 or 5 great mages and great swordsmen. In an all-out fight with no care for survival, it wasn't certain that the Viper Nest would suffer a loss. But a great mage under 20 was a whole different story. After all, before Mafmerlin, who had been the youngest great mage of Thousand Sails City, the Monchai family's eldest son, Ryan, he had yet to reach his 30s. But that was enough for Solomon to praise his talent. When Ryan returned, all of Thousand Sails City became lively. Who knew how many forces had tried to ally with the Monchai family? Was that because of Ryan's current strength? Obviously not. Any group that was able to become one of the major forces of Thousand Sails City was sure to have at least several great mages and great swordsmen. What they all lied was Ryan's potential. Someone that could advance to become a great mage before his 30s was bound to become a high mage. In other words, whoever allied to the Monchai family now would be able to gain the backing of a high mage in the future. If that was the case for Iron, then what about Mappa? This was a great mage that had yet to even reach his 20s. Thousand Sails City had never produced one, and even in the entire eastern part of the kingdom, there were only a few. Saus didn't even dare to think what kinds of achievements such a genius would have in the future. He truly couldn't afford to offend him. Moreover, Saus didn't have the power to do so right now. In the last 10 years, the Viper Nest had been expanding in the depths of the Poison Fog Canyon. Saus was the only one who knew the full reason, and it was a secret that could shock the entire kingdom. But that expansion required about half of the Viper Nest's manpower. Before he found that temple, Saus couldn't use all his forces. This was also the reason that the Viper Nest had remained low-key in Thousand Sails City for the past 10 years. If Mappa Merlin was an ordinary mage, then Saus naturally wouldn't hesitate. He would directly find an excuse to scam him of the formula of the Hope Potion. But Saus now knew that Mappa was no ordinary mage, and that he wasn't even an ordinary great mage. Someone that could so casually injure a great swordsman, how could they be an ordinary great mage? This time, Saus would have to think about the consequences. Bell, what do you think? 5th rank great mage or above? The one who answered was an old man who had been sitting behind Saus without speaking all along. The old man was wearing a black robe with cuffs that were embroidered with a thin, silver line. Without a doubt, this was a true great mage. But compared to the great swordsman laying on the bed, the old man's body didn't have clear magic fluctuations. He wasn't like Ryo's, whose every move would lead to a surge of aura. If Lin Yan were there, he would have been able to see through that old man's level of strength with a glance. He was far stronger than the injured Ryo's. Ryo's had only advanced recently, and he was still unable to completely control his aura. In the eyes of a true powerhouse, this was the mark of a beginner. As for the old man behind Saus, he had completely erased his magic fluctuations. Only experienced great mages could accomplish this. Many people knew that the Viper Nest had a very mysterious great mage. He had already been standing behind Saus during his rise. He rarely talked and rarely made a move, but even Saus would have no choice but to listen to each of his words. Every time he acted, he would thoroughly take care of a troublesome enemy for the Viper Nest. That great mage's real strength was unknown, but people knew for sure that he was very, very powerful. Even the owner of the Sage Tower, Solomon, once jokingly asked Saus if he was willing to let Great Mage Bell join the Sage Tower. The Sage Tower was even willing to offer 3 great mages in exchange. Naturally, this was a joke. Saus couldn't let Bell join the Sage Tower, and the Sage Tower also couldn't just trade 3 great mages for him. But not long after, Solomon's joke spread through Thousand Sails City, showing that Great Mage Bell was powerful. Bell's position in the Viper Nest was very strange. He wasn't like a subordinate, more like a consultant. Most of the time, before making a move, Saus would first ask Bell for his opinion on the matters. Just like now, when Bell said 5th rank great mage, Saus only took a deep breath. Saus didn't doubt him despite his claim that a young man who was not yet 20 had already become at least a 5th rank great mage. If Bell said 5th rank great mage, then it was definitely a 5th rank great mage. Okay, those 5 apprentice alchemists aside, we still have to deal with the goods. Get someone to send them to the Edge Rift outskirts before dark. Being able to sit in this position, Saus definitely wasn't an indecisive person. Since he learnt that the Gilded Rose wasn't as easy of a target as he had thought, Saus immediately cut his losses. Even if that meant losing some reputation. But to Saus, a loss of reputation wasn't the worst outcome. Avoiding a powerful enemy was far more important. Pulling back at this point would at most make him a laughing stock for a while, but offending such a young great mage definitely wasn't something that could be easily settled. How much might this youth grow in the next 10 or 20 years? He might even become an archmage. At that time, he might end up crushing his old foes to death with just a finger. Quick, quick! Send someone right away to deal with it. That Mappa Merlin also said Ryo's forced out as he rested on the sickbed. Yes. He also said that the trouble caused to each alchemy apprentice is worth 200,000 gold. and furthermore the damage that I dealt to the Gilded Rose has to be compensated for with 1 million gold. 2 million gold. Souse nearly jumped up from his seat, but settled for heavily smacking a table. What does he take the viper nest for? Help. It's terrible. A mage rushed in, his black robe torn all over in a mess, the traces of a large, black burn visible on his shoulder. It looked like he had been attacked by a fire spell. Get to the point. Why are you looking like this? Souse, who had been shocked by the demand of 2 million gold in compensation, was in a twitchy mood. He immediately erupted in anger when he saw this mage bursting in while looking so shoddy. No, boss, Mather Merlin is forcing his way in. Chapter 63, Ice and Fire Shield. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. This was too much of a humiliation. Souse could feel the veins on his forehead throbbing, as the situation was really unbearable. The viper nest had occupied the Poison Fog Canyon for an entire decade, and no force had ever dared to force their way in. But that Mather Merlin decided to invade the Poison Fog Canyon because of 5 apprentice alchemists and a few carts of alchemy items. This was too brutal. He wasn't putting the viper nest in his eyes at all. Mather Merlin, you are courting death. Souse was already completely enraged. His normally pale face flushed red as the table shook under his hands. The great swordsman in the sickbed started shivering. Riose wanted to warn Souse that he shouldn't say something like that. But seeing Souse's ruddy face, the great swordsman tactfully decided to remain silent and just let things play out. Let's go. I want to see how bold this Mather fellow is. Souse left the wooden house with Bell following just behind. He raised his head and saw numerous arrows flying out of the sentry towers on both sides of the Poison Fog Canyon like a swarm of locusts. A formation of 20 mages was already covering the entrance with spells. Over 100 elite fighters holding weapons were standing behind them, ready to charge at the enemy any time now. Reckless fools. Souse snorted after exiting the wooden house, his expression slowly easing up. The viper nest he had been painstakingly building all these years finally got to show the results. These elites were able to organize themselves when facing the sudden attack of a great mage without anyone panicking. Indeed, the viper nest had stayed low-key for the last few decades, but just because they remained relatively inconspicuous, it didn't mean that they were easily bullied. That Mather Merlin was overexcited from wielding his powers as a great mage and, in a moment of foolishness, decided that my viper nest was an easy target. Now it's time to make him pay for underestimating me. Seeing the valiant fight put up by his subordinates, Souse's flushed face finally cooled down. He looked at the battlefield and focused on the entrance. A rain of arrows and spells fell onto the entrance. Every corner of the entrance was hit by that frightening firepower. Dozens of corpses were lying there, blood filling every hole in the ground, and most of the soil was now dark red. They were taking no chances with this foe. I want to see how many people this Mather Merlin brought here to die. Boss the mage who had burst in and brought the terrible news earlier once again said something dreadful. That person is alone. Souse's face instantly froze. Mather being alone. Doesn't that mean that all those corpses on the ground are my subordinates? Fuck, Souse suddenly cursed. But just as he said that, the mage next to him cut in, stammering, boss, look. What? Souse gave him a fierce glance before following his finger and catching sight of a silhouette walking from the entrance of the Poison Fog Canyon. From their location, that silhouette didn't seem very tall. It could even be said to be thin and weak. It felt delicate, standing amidst the rain of arrows and spells covering the sky, as if it would be crushed in an instant. But that delicate silhouette was slowly walking in from the entrance of the Poison Fog Canyon. Whether it was the arrows or the spells, they didn't seem to exist in his eyes. He unhurriedly plodded along, as if he wasn't entering the deadly Poison Fog Canyon, but instead just going for an afternoon walk. The only difference was that this silhouette was surrounded by blue and red lights. Even under the bombardment of spells, those two lights were exceptionally dazzling. Souse could clearly see that the two lights were fluttering at an astonishing speed, and that every flicker would stop an arrow or a spell. That silhouette was relying on the protection of these two lights to enter the Poison Fog Canyon unharmed. This is the Ice Fire Shield? Souse looked at the two lights as if he had seen something unfathomable. The ice fire shield wasn't an earth-shattering, heaven-defying spell. It wasn't even a spell from a neglected branch of magic. It existed in almost every great mage's spell book. The ice shield blocked all physical damage while the fire shield erased all magical attacks. Because of its efficiency, it could be said that as long as there wasn't an extremely significant difference in power, nothing could pass directly through the ice-fire shield, whether it was a physical or a magical attack. Furthermore, after the ice-fire shield was initially cast, there was no need to focus on the mana supply. As long as there was enough mana left, the ice-fire shield would remain channeled. For most great mages, the ice-fire shield was a must-know protective spell. But very few great mages would spend too much time under the protection of the ice-fire shield. The weak point of the ice-fire shield was very obvious. It was a channeled spell, so whether it was the ice shield or the fire shield, they both needed to be personally controlled by the great mage to be able to block all attacks. Without sufficient reaction speed and control, those two lights would only be mere decoration. Changes would happen every so often during battles between those as powerful as great mages, and no one could guarantee that they could keep controlling the ice-fire shield with the necessary precision when distracted. After all, great mages were people, not machines. But now, Souse really felt that he was facing a machine. Well, is this really a 5th rank great mage? I don't know. Souse gulped nervously. As the leader of the #1 underground force in Thousand Sails City, Souse had seen true powerhouses like the Sage Tower's 3 big shots, the Silver Moon Mercenaries Sasu, the Black Horn Auctions Kajga, and the one standing behind him, Bell. Who among them wasn't a powerhouse whose name shook through Thousand Sails City? But Souse had never seen a great mage that was able to manipulate an ice-fire shield to this extent. He could see the arrows fired from the 10 sentry towers and the spells showering down from 24 mages, yet this young great mage was still able to enter the Poison Fog Canyon uninjured. Is he truly a 5th rank great mage? This was the first time Souse had doubted Bell's judgment. What can I do? Apostrophe. Souse's breathing gradually became rough, his face becoming paler and paler as Lin Yun slowly approached. Souse was clearly aware that his elite subordinates couldn't keep blocking this young great mage. If the fight continued, it would inevitably end up in a one-sided massacre. The power shown by this young great mage had already far exceeded what he had estimated. Against this kind of a powerhouse, his elite subordinates were nothing more than cannon fodder. In the entire Viper Nest, maybe only Bell could fight this intruder, but even if Bell made a move, he might still not be able to kill his counterpart. And if they were only able to force the opponent to retreat, nothing would stop him from coming every so often to toy with the Viper Nest. Or, I could accept it. 2 million gold doesn't seem to be too much after all. Apostrophe. As Souse was hesitating, a rumbling sound echoed in the distance. Souse's eyelids twitched. He clearly saw that young great mage throw out a flame burst, exploding a sentry tower. Damn it, quick, quick! Everyone stop, now. Souse no longer hesitated. He immediately told the mages to transmit his order as he hurried a few steps toward the center of the canyon, waving his hands while loudly yelling, "Great Mage Merlin! Please stop, this is a misunderstanding." "Hi Leader Souse." Lin Yun replied to Souse cordially while at the same time firing off another flame burst. Moments later, a rumbling sound echoed as another sentry tower exploded. I'm sorry, it slipped. It's alright, it's alright." Souse lowered himself while giving respect to Lin Yun as an ugly smile appeared on his face. "Great Mage Merlin, can we have a discussion?" "Of course, I wouldn't dare to offend Leader Souse." Lin Yun was also smiling, but another flame burst was already prepared in his hand. Just as he was about to continue slipping again, he felt a familiar mana fluctuation from the depths of the Poison Fog Canyon. At this instant, Lin Yun's expression changed a bit, but he quickly covered it up. At the same time, he chose not to let that last flame burst slip this time. He was secretly paying attention to that familiar mana fluctuation. "That's great." Souse didn't notice Lin Yun's expression. After seeing that Lin Yun had stayed his hand, Souse quietly heaved a sigh. He greeted Lin Yun enthusiastically while turning to berate those fighters who were poised to charge. "You scoundrels, Hurry up and put down your weapons. Great Mage Merlin is our Viper Nest's precious guest. If a single hair on his head is harmed, I'll feed you to the magic beasts in the Poison Fog Canyon. One after the other, the fighters let go of their weapons. But they couldn't stop cursing inwardly. How can we even touch a hair with those lights circling around him? He could surely kill us all without losing a single hair. Chapter 64, Magic Spring. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. I am saving you, isn't that obvious? After 2 sentry towers had already been sent to heaven, how could Souse dare to try and make excuses to Lin Yun? These fighters were elites of the Viper Nest. If Mappa had made another move against them, Souse wouldn't have been able to endure it. Great Mage Merlin, can we discuss things inside? As soon as he thought of the possibility that Lin Yun might cause further harm to his forces, Souse didn't dare to keep him waiting outside, so he invited Lin Yun into the wooden house. 3 people entered the wooden house together, Lin Yun, Souse, and Belle. After taking a seat inside, Lin Yun glanced at Belle. He had heard people saying that the Viper Nest had a very powerful great mage, and that even Solomon had once praised him. After looking at Belle, Lin Yun guessed that this should be that person. He seemed to be an exceptional great mage, around 6th or 7th rank, and with a very powerful magic conducting rune. Great Mage Belle's true fighting strength should be higher than his rank would suggest. Lin Yun was truly a bit afraid of this most powerful mage of the Viper Nest. If the Viper Nest had made their base in another place instead, Lin Yun might not necessarily have dared to go over. But since this was the Poison Fog Canyon, everything would be a lot easier. Great Mage Merlin, this is truly a misunderstanding. Souse bowed his head far faster than Lin Yun had imagined. This time, all Souse could think about was how to send this demon away. This demon's destructive power was too frightening. He strolled inside and casually killed 20 or so elites of the Viper Nest, toying with his forces for all the while. If he had kept going, the Viper Nest would have been destroyed. He was a living curse. How come I never heard about Loch Merlin's son being such a demon? Wasn't it said that Loch Merlin's son had no prospects and was still a young magic apprentice? Damned magic apprentice, Souse inwardly cursed while grinding his teeth. If someone mentions that, I'll show them to those 2 demolished sentry towers. Leader Souse, there is no problem, Great Mage Merlin, I understand. Souse only wanted to get rid of this guy as soon as possible, so he hurriedly agreed to the conditions Lin Yun had yet to say. 5 apprentice alchemists, 200,000 gold each, along with what Rios broke, a total of 2 million gold. Rest assured, I'll have someone deliver a crystal card to the Gilded Rose tomorrow. Does Great Mage Merlin still need anything else? Souse's last sentence was purely out of politeness. But being polite didn't matter, as Lin Yun wouldn't be courteous with him. Yes, there is still something. Lin Yun suddenly recalled the familiar magic fluctuation that he had sensed when he entered the Poison Fog Canyon. If he wasn't wrong, it had most likely come from that place that had been mentioned by countless mages during the pinnacle of the magic era. He definitely wouldn't hold back when it came to matters related to that place. That region might mean nothing to others, but for himself, it was an opportunity to have 5 magic arrays. Hearing Lin Yun's words, Souse felt like slapping himself twice. It was just small talk, small talk. Damn, you were the one that proposed this. Are you going back on your words already? But the words were already spoken, so Souse couldn't back out. Thus, Souse had no choice but to brace himself and squeeze out a twitching smile. Great Mage Merlin, what do you need? Please do not hesitate. Since Leader Souse says so, I won't need to be polite about it. Souse felt the vein on his forehead twitching as he mentally complained, since when were you polite? I believe Leader Souse also knows that my Gilded Rose has some level of cooperation with the Silver Moon mercenaries. I agreed to provide a large amount of alchemy products to the Silver Moon mercenaries battling in Edge Rift. Poison Fog Canyon is basically the only route to get there. And thus, I would like to discuss with Leader Souse if my Gilded Roses caravans could be allowed to pass freely through the Poison Fog Canyon in the meantime. This Souse hesitated a bit and frowned. It wasn't that Lin Yun's conditions were harsh and unreasonable. The issue this time was caused by the Gilded Roses caravans entering the Poison Fog Canyon. Lin Yun's request could be considered an attempt to settle the problem in good faith, but Souse was somewhat worried. Many people knew that in the past decade, Souse had been thinking of every possible way to expand in the depths of the Poison Fog Canyon, but had never told the real reason to anyone. This was because Souse knew that the depths of the Poison Fog Canyon held a temple. In those years, when Souse was still a good-for-nothing, he once went into the Poison Fog Canyon and found the corpse of a powerful swordsman. Souse had inherited his sword skills from that powerful swordsman. But Souse's talent wasn't very great, so he was only a 4th-rank great swordsman. However, the inheritance of the swordsman's skills wasn't all that he found. There was also a diary. Written in this diary was the reason that the great swordsman crossed the sea to reach Thousand Sails City. He had been heading for the temple hidden deep within the Poison Fog Canyon. When Souse first read the diary, he was truly frightened. After getting some results with the swordsman's inheritance, Souse established the Viper Nest and joined the power struggle within Thousand Sails City. Over the course of the next 20 years, Souse managed to grow the Viper Nest into becoming the largest underground force, and to everyone's shock, they went and occupied the Poison Fog Canyon. The Poison Fog Canyon was truly too important to Souse. Important to the point that Souse wouldn't tolerate anything unexpected. Lin Yun's condition sounded reasonable and fair, but if something went wrong, it would mean 20 years of wasted effort to Souse. Thus, Souse thought for a bit before deciding to refuse. As he opened his mouth to reply, Lin Yun cut in. "Oh right, Leader Souse." When he saw Souse frown, Lin Yun guessed that he would refuse. But this was related to an opportunity to quickly get 5 magic arrays. How could Lin Yun let him refuse? Before Souse could say a word, Lin Yun took out a glass bottle. "I heard that the poison fog from the Poison Fog Canyon has caused the Viper Nest a lot of trouble over the years, so I specially prepared this potion before coming to see you." "A potion?" "Yes, a potion that can protect people from the influence of the poison fog." Lin Yun opened the bottle, and a faintly sweet fragrance spread through the wooden house. "I call it Magic Spring. It's quite potent, so there is no need to use a lot. 1 bottle is enough. Put it in a ventilated place and within 3 days, the poison fog will become harmless to your subordinates." "This kind of potion exists?" Souse suddenly felt elated. If this magic spring really was as mystical as the young great mage claimed, his plans to expand toward the depths of the Poison Fog Canyon could finish perhaps 3 years sooner. In the past 10 years, the poison fog truly had caused the Viper Nest a lot of trouble. They would lose about 10 elites every month because of it. Souse truly wouldn't have expected these negotiations to bring him such pleasant news. "Wait a second. That's not right." Just as Souse was about to thank Lin Yun and accept, he realized something wrong. The smile on his face stiffened, and his face turned deathly white. Although his eyes were still looking at Lin Yun, his gaze was now filled with anger and fright. "No good. This isn't an offer to help the Viper Nest. This is an open threat. This young mage showing me the magic spring potion is a way to tell me that the Gilded Rose has already thoroughly researched the poison fog in this canyon. If he can make a potion that can restrain the poison fog, then he can probably also make a potion to strengthen the poison. He might even be carrying such a potion at this moment. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to come to the Poison Fog Canyon alone, even if he is a 5th-rank great mage." As his thoughts reached this point, Souse felt a chill spread through his body. If such a potion appeared in the Poison Fog Canyon, then a calamity would befall the Viper Nest. The threatening poison fog would turn into a monster that devoured lives rampantly, and the Viper Nest's hundreds of elites, raised throughout the years, would vanish in an instant. Souse felt the strength seeping out of his body. He sat there in a daze, staring at Lin Yun with complex feelings. "Loch Merlin's son is too frightening." Great Mage Merlin surely has more than 1 potion? Despite Souse knowing that he shouldn't provoke the young mage in front of him, when he thought about the Viper Nest stepping into hell, he couldn't help being a bit sarcastic. Haha, naturally, if Leader Souse feels that one bottle isn't enough, I can offer a few bottles, Lin Yun responded with a smile. Chapter 65, Rotten Flower. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Souse didn't guess wrong. Besides the magic spring potion that could restrain the poison fog, Lin Yun had indeed also prepared a potion to strengthen the poison mist. This was the real reason that Lin Yun had dared to enter the poison fog canyon alone. He knew that he was at an overwhelming advantage inside it. The current poison fog canyon wasn't very well known. Thousand Sails City's people didn't understand why Souse Viper Nest would occupy such a poor territory. The only person in Thousand Sails City that could make sense of Souse's decision to expand there was Lin Yun. This was because he knew that 100 or so years later, numerous forces would fight over the Poison Fog Canyon. Initially, a mercenary group found a temple from the Third Dynasty in the depths of the canyon. Later on, that group became one of the peak mercenary groups of the kingdom by relying on the wealth that they brought out. For some unknown reason, rumors about the place leaked out many years later. Suddenly, all the powers of the kingdom were like sharks who had smelled blood. They all rushed to try to gain control of the Poison Fog Canyon. Lin Yun remembered at least 3 wars that involved more than 10,000 people each. Blood dyed every corner of the Poison Fog Canyon. The magic spring potion that Lin Yun had taken out and the sunset potion in his pocket had appeared in one of the wars. At that time, the sunset potion had brought about a true bloodbath. Countless corpses were left in the Poison Fog Canyon, and one of the peak powers of the kingdom was destroyed in the war. That war was viewed as one of the classic examples of the power of alchemy and would be repeatedly mentioned by alchemists for the following years. Lin Yun found the formula of the magic spring and sunset potions in the notes of those alchemists. When he heard Souse, Lin Yun knew that he wouldn't have to use the sunset potion. But Souse didn't really need to worry about Lin Yun. After all, what Lin Yun wanted wasn't the wealth of the temple. He just wanted the opportunity to get 5 magic arrays quickly. Moreover, whether Souse would be able to obtain the wealth in the temple wasn't set in stone. Unless he had the luck of that future mercenary group or had the help of an archmage, Souse wouldn't be able to catch sight of the temple he was yearning for. But Lin Yun obviously wouldn't tell him that. I know that Leader Souse has been painstakingly expanding in the Poison Fog Canyon for years and definitely wouldn't allow outsiders to go inside. How about this, Leader Souse? My caravans will establish a path only in the south, and only for a period of 3 months. After 3 months, even if the Silver Moon mercenaries have yet to clear Edge Rift, our Gilded Rose will think of another way to supply them. South? Souse finally looked better when he heard this proposal. He would be able to accept it if they only passed through the southern part of the Poison Fog Canyon. After all, the temple was located in the northern part of the Poison Fog Canyon. If they stayed in the south, then even if the Gilded Rose's people had wings, how could they influence his plans? That's good. 3 months. Souse still felt like he was losing out, though, so he added with clenched teeth, "But I want 10 bottles of that potion." "That can be done. Come get them at the Gilded Rose tomorrow." Now that they had agreed, Souse handled business straightforwardly. When Lin Yun came out of the wooden house, the 5 apprentice alchemists were already there waiting for him. At the same time, Souse told Lin Yun that he had sent someone to deliver the batch of alchemy items and that they would definitely reach Edge Rift before dark. Lin Yun said a few things to the apprentice alchemists before sending them back. Lin Yun then told Souse that he wanted to take a look at the southern part of the Poison Fog Canyon to see if there was a location suitable for a road. Souse naturally didn't dare to stop him. The magic spring potion was in his hand, but he was sure that the young great mage still had a potion that was capable of strengthening the poison fog in his hands. After watching Lin Yun's silhouette fade into the distance, Souse made a decision while gnashing his teeth. Regardless of how he did it, he had to get a group of mighty alchemists, or else the poison fog of the Poison Fog Canyon would remain a rope tied below his neck, leaving the Viper Nest forever unable to escape the control of that young great mage. Lin Yun was unaware of Souse's decision, but even if he knew about it, he wouldn't care about such a trivial matter. Regardless of whether it was the magic spring or the sunset potion, they were both just parts of a strategy. For a mage, the most reliable strategy would always be the magic that they controlled. Lin Yun was confident that once he had 5 magic arrays, he would be able to kill every member of the Viper Nest in an hour even without the Sunset Potion. This included Great Mage Bell, who currently seemed quite formidable. Far from the line of sight of the Viper Nest's sentry towers, Lin Yun took out a magic spring potion and drank it. Although he had told Souse that the potion should be placed in a ventilated place to gradually grant his followers resistance to the poison over the course of 3 days, that would only be effective in the places where the fog was thin. If one wanted to enter the depths of the Poison Fog Canyon with the densest poison like Lin Yun, they would have to drink the magic spring potion. In this era, no one understood the Poison Fog Canyon more than Lin Yun. Not even Souse, who had been exploring the area for over a decade. The current Souse still didn't know that if he entered further into the depths of the Poison Fog Canyon, the concentration of the poison would become extremely frightening, to the point that it eradicated all life apart from those magic beasts who fed on the poison fog. Even weeds couldn't survive. Even the magic spring potion in Lin Yun's hands, which would become known as the pass for traveling through the Poison Fog Canyon in the future, could only protect a person for 10 minutes per bottle. But thankfully, Lin Yun had come prepared. He had over a dozen magic spring potions inside his bag. In other words, Lin Yun would have close to 2 hours to explore the depths of the Poison Fog Canyon. After drinking the magic spring potion, a faint green mist began spreading on Lin Yun's body. It looked thin, but it was condensing over him, not scattering. Regardless of how Lin Yun moved, that green mist would keep lingering around him. By this time, Lin Yun had already gone very far into the southern part of the Poison Mist Canyon. The red fog in his surroundings became denser and denser. It was visibly thicker than it had been back at the Viper Nest base. But after Lin Yun drank the potion, the red mist transformed like ice under sunshine, melting away. Indeed, melting. As the red fog came into contact with the green mist, steam drifted into the air. Lin Yun relied on the protection of the green mist to go deeper into the Poison Fog Canyon. It should be near here. After drinking the 3rd magic spring potion, Lin Yun stopped. The description left behind by the alchemists of the Peak era only had vague descriptions of the Poison Fog Canyon. There weren't any maps or even any precise paths to follow. All that Lin Yun could do was to blindly move about while relying on those unclear directions, hoping that he would reach his destination. In any case, he still had a decent stock of potions in his bag, enough to turn back in case of an unforeseen event. After drinking another potion, the red fog cleared up once more, and Lin Yun could clearly see crimson-colored barren soil ahead of him. It felt as if someone had watered the soil with blood. There should be a cave here. After making a rough assessment of the distance, Lin Yun didn't immediately hurry to find the cave. He instead whispered a few incantations and quickly cast haste, levitation, poison resistance, stone skin, and some other buffs on himself. Sure enough, just as Lin Yun summoned his ice fire shield, a sudden sound came from below, followed by a bright red color blossoming under his feet. It was like a huge red flower blooming. But Lin Yun was already prepared, having made his move just when the sound echoed. The power of the magic array was put on full display. After merging with the magic array, the haste spell was almost twice as effective as an ordinary haste spell. It was comparable to a great mage magic conducting rune. With this superior haste spell, Lin Yun's speed was like a gust of wind. Before the bright red blossomed, Lin Yun had already rushed 10 meters away, and with the levitation effect, Lin Yun broke away from the pull of gravity as he hovered above the ground. At the same time, an instant cast magic array was activated, and a huge fireball hovered in Lin Yun's palm. Instant cast flame burst. A loud rumbling sound thundered out, making it seem as if the entire Poison Fog Canyon was shaking. A mournful scream echoed. Lin Yun looked down, and sure enough, it was a rotten flower. Rotten flowers weren't actually flowers. They were merely flower-like magic beasts. They normally hid underground in the Poison Fog Canyon, unmoving for months, or even a year. However, once one of them smelled fresh flesh, it would immediately come out and spread its swarms of red petals and swallow its prey in one bite. Chapter 66. Fire Arrow Rain. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. The might of the Flame Burst spell would never leave one feeling disappointed. Even if it was a rotten flower that had reached the 15th level, it would still be maimed by Lin Yun's bombardment of flame bursts. A 10-meter-long petal was hit hard by a blast, causing a stinking, dark red liquid to leak out of the wound. This was rotten flower blood, which was an ingredient that many alchemists liked to use to compound poisons. Poisons that used rotten flower blood were extremely corrosive and would cause decomposition of tissues upon contact or ingestion. Even a great mage like Lin Yun wouldn't dare be careless, relying on his temporary airborne state that he achieved by combining haste and levitation. Lin Yun used his mana liberally, casting flame bursts one after the other. In a short dozen seconds of magic array activation, Lin Yun rained down a dozen or so flame bursts. A violent explosion followed each of the flame bursts, echoed by mournful shrieks as dazzling flames splashed about. The rotten flower was struggling to come out into the open from underground a few times, but how could Lin Yun give it a chance to do so? He kept pushing it back with continued flame bursts. A rotten flower was a dangerous foe that had far more vitality and tenacity than any ordinary monster. If Lin Yun let it emerge into the open, it would take a lot more time and effort to deal with it. The amount of magic spring potion remaining in Lin Yun's bag wouldn't be enough if it dragged out too long. Thus, from start to finish, Lin Yun only used one spell. His instant cast Flame Burst. Flame Burst was a mana-intensive spell, and especially so when using the instant cast. The dozen-second bombardment ended up consuming half of Lin Yun's mana. Naturally, this shocking consumption of mana brought about even more shocking results. The imposing 15th level rotten flower never even managed to get out of its hole as it struggled one last time before its entire body went stiff. After the effects of the levitation spell wore off, Lin Yun dropped down from the sky. The rotten flower had already turned into a black lump. Just moments ago, this had been a lively and aggressive monster. After landing, Lin Yun quickly gathered the rotten flower's mana crystal. Afterwards, the ring on Lin Yun's right hand flashed as pure mana slowly poured into him. The elemental amber that Lin Yun got from the bone plane on his last trip was embedded in the ring. It would be reasonable to say that the best way to use elemental amber was to enchant a high mage spell onto it. This way, even a magic apprentice could use it to cast a spell that would normally only be usable by high mages. This would be an immense increase in power, but enchanting it with such a spell would be very costly, and furthermore, an archmage would have to personally do the enchanting, which would incur another huge fee. This wasn't something that Lin Yun could do right now, so he gave up on that method. Instead, he used mithril to create the ring and carved two miniature alchemy formations on it, one used during meditation to absorb mana, and one normally used to replenish mana. If 10 alchemists saw this, 9 of them would definitely shake their heads. This was too rough and was a waste of material as excellent as elemental amber. But Lin Yun was used to hard times, so he had no problem with it being rough. It was good enough for him as long as a magic tool worked. He wouldn't needlessly pursue appearances. For example, these two miniature arrays, absorption and replenishment, were more than enough to take advantage of the properties of the elemental amber. Although it was at most an excellent magic tool, when judged in terms of practicality, even most extraordinary or inheritance magic tools wouldn't be able to compare to this ring. As the elemental amber's radiance lit up the surroundings, the pure mana kept pouring into Lin Yun. The mana he had expended on the bombardment was now nearly all recovered. After finishing up, Lin Yun cast life detection again, and once he was convinced that there weren't any more rotting flowers hiding nearby, Lin Yun put the mana crystal into his bag and started looking for the cave. But he soon understood. Don't tell me. Lin Yun looked up, a lifeless expression on his face. Lin Yun clearly remembered the notes saying something about entering a cave. But how the hell do I enter? Lin Yun looked up and saw the cave on the sheer cliff, and inwardly cursed those alchemists, let alone the fact that the cave was located on the cliff. The worst part was that Lin Yun could see no fewer than 4 nests. Swarms of toxic dragonflies were wandering around the entrance of the cave. Although toxic dragonflies were usually low-level monsters, These were swarms of them. The entrance of the cave alone was filled with at least 100 toxic dragonflies. Just looking at this would make anyone feel numb. Lin Yan truly wanted to confront the authors of those notes. Entering? What about entering? Don't mess with me apostrophe. But Lin Yan understood after thinking about it. The alchemists who wrote those notes were at the very least at the high mage rank, with most of them being archmages. Such powerhouses didn't even need to worry about the dragonflies. The pressure emanating from an archmage would be enough to make these toxic dragonflies flee. No wonder they didn't care to write about these. But it's not like I can enter easily like they could. Lin Yan didn't have the tyrannical pressure of an archmage. The toxic dragonflies wouldn't leave him alone if they spotted him, let alone if he tried to get inside. Looks like I can only fight my way in apostrophe. Thankfully, there was still a lot of mana in the elemental amber and the rotten flowers mana crystal, so he could still replenish his mana if needed. Lin Yan knew that this was an unavoidable fight and that he would have to settle it quickly. The longer it dragged on, the more disadvantageous the situation would be. He still had more magic spring potions in his bag, but if he wasted time here and something happened in the cave later on, he would only have himself to blame. Once he decided on a plan, Lin Yan waved his hands a few times to cast some buffs. With the help of haste and lightweight, he moved like a nimble cat and climbed the cliff at a lightning speed. He was already at the entrance of the cave after just 20 seconds. But he had also alerted all the toxic dragonflies in the surroundings. A green, venomous swarm flew over, and it looked like myriad locusts were sweeping through the air. The entrance was narrow to begin with, and now that it was filled with a swarm of toxic dragonflies, even a buffed Lin Yan couldn't dodge their advance. But he had no intention to dodge. Lin Yan activated the instant cast magic array just as the first spurt of venom came out of the swarm. It was immediately followed by a gesture and a thick ice wall materialized to block it. It wasn't too big or too small, perfectly protecting Lin Yan's body. Numerous spurts of venom landed on the ice, creating a sizzling sound that would make people shiver. Lin Yan managed to avoid being showered in venom, which was the reason behind his earlier apprehension. Besides the issue of quantity, the main problem was how corrosive the venom was, exceeding even the danger of unprocessed rotten flower blood. In an instant, over 100 splashes of venom accumulated on the ice wall, many of them overlapping, causing it to start melting at an alarming rate. In a mere 5 seconds, the thick ice wall erected by Lin Yan began to collapse, and Lin Yan would once again be exposed to the venom of the toxic dragonflies. But the ice wall managed to buy 5 seconds, allowing him to complete an incantation. Flame Barrier. It was also a defensive spell, but compared to Ice Wall, a mage-level spell, Flame Barrier was on a completely different level of existence. Flame Barrier was known as a divine art of fire magic, and its frightening temperature could even melt steel. More importantly, as long as Lin Yan was willing to keep pouring mana into it to maintain it, the flame barrier would never be extinguished, unless Lin Yan himself took damage. A dozen toxic dragonflies had flown too close and directly fell into the flame barrier. These pitiful toxic dragonflies didn't even have time to shriek before turning into pitch-black husks. And this wasn't over. After raising the flame barrier, Lin Yan used one hand to control the raging flames while the other hand continued making gestures, matching up with the quick incantations he was still uttering. He was able to cast a second spell, Fire Arrow, and not just one or two of them. He shaped several dozens, close to 100. The narrow cave entrance had suddenly become covered in dazzling flames. The flame barrier separated Lin Yan from the massacre being wrought by the numerous fire arrows piercing through the air. After merging Fire Arrow into the magic array, it was no longer on the level of the simple spell used by fledgling mages. Under the support of the magic array, the might of the Fire Arrow dramatically increased. The dozens of arrows flying through the narrow cave were like a meat grinder, continuously killing all the scattered toxic dragonflies. Chapter 67, The Eye of Reincarnation. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. But that shocking firepower also came with equivalently huge mana consumption. When a mage used Fire Arrow, they would at most summon 1 or 2 flaming arrows. Even with the support of a meta magic, they would only be able to cast a dozen at most. It wasn't because they were unable to cast more. It was because they weren't willing to. Each added fire arrow would increase the mana consumption as well as make controlling the spell more difficult. Someone like Lin Yun, capable of casting 100 flaming arrows in one fire arrow cast, was something that any great mage would never even thought possible. After all, this magnitude made the spell 100 times harder to control and consumed 100 times more mana. Even if it was originally only a low-tier mage spell, after being layered 100 times, the consumption and the control difficulty reached a frightening level. Lin Yun had replenished his mana earlier, but already used a huge amount once again. Half of his mana had been used in just a short moment, and the remaining half was quickly dwindling since he was still controlling the flame barrier. Lin Yun could only maintain this kind of limit challenging casting for 30 seconds. After those 30 seconds, Lin Yun felt that the amount of mana within his body was dangerously low. But he didn't panic. The ring on his finger flashed once again and pure mana poured into his body. With the elemental amber's timely mana replenishment, Lin Yun was able to cast yet another spell. He managed the feat of triple casting in such dire circumstances. Originally, the flame barrier and the fire arrow rain formed an impenetrable defense, but the battlefield underwent a shocking change with the appearance of Lin Yun's third spell, a second flame barrier. Two flame barriers, one in front of the toxic dragonflies, and one behind them, effectively locked the swarm in fire. Countless toxic dragonflies were flying back and fro, the heat from the spells making them restless. They wanted to rush out of the flame trap, but they were completely surrounded. They had no way out. The swarm of toxic dragonflies was forcefully condensed in a narrow space. Waiting for them was a fire arrow rain made up of 100 fire arrows. It only took a short moment before the swarm turned into a pile of pitch black coal. There was no more toxic dragonflies once Lin Yun's last fire arrow found its target. Lin Yun let out a long exhausted sigh, using the wall to support himself as he fished out the rotten flower's mana crystal. He was deathly pale, and his forehead was covered in sweat. That fight might have seemed simple, getting rid of a few hundred toxic dragonflies in a few dozen seconds, but only Lin Yun himself knew how dangerous that fight had been. 3 spells cast, 1 use of the magic array, and the unfathomable triple casting. It was reaching Lin Yun's limits. It was no exaggeration to say that those toxic dragonflies brought out a huge pressure to Lin Yun, even greater than the Viper Nest's Great Mage spell. Yes, the toxic dragonflies were level 10, and any 5th rank mage could easily kill a toxic dragonfly. But Lin Yun hadn't faced a single toxic dragonfly or 2, he had faced a swarm made up of 4 nests, amounting to several hundred toxic dragonflies. If Lin Yun had made a mistake, like his flame barrier not trapping all the toxic dragonflies, or if he hadn't completed the 3rd spell, a different situation would have awaited him. Several hundred toxic dragonflies waiting outside the cave, ready to spurt venom. At that time, Lin Yun would have had no other choice but to brace himself and kill them all one by one. And it wouldn't have been a matter of a few dozen seconds, nor a few minutes. Lin Yun might have ran out of magic spring potions by then. Fortunately, nothing unexpected happened. From the first ice wall to the last fire arrow, each spell perfectly reached the effect Lin Yun wanted. Lin Yun recalled every detail of this battle while tightly holding the rotten flower mana crystal, slowly extracting the mana it contained and carefully purifying it before slowly pouring it into the magic array. Very few great mages would extract mana from mana crystal usually. It was due to the mana from the mana crystal being filled with impurities, and a moment of carelessness would bring danger to the great mage. A serious case might even involve mana backlash. But Lin Yun wasn't an ordinary great mage. After all, the only source of mana Lin Yun was able to access during the end of the magic era was from the Nether Storm. The mana coming from it was filled with much more impurities than a monster's mana crystal. Every time he meditated to extract mana from the Nether Storm felt like withstanding torture to him. How could the Lin Yun from that era be afraid of some mana crystal's impurities? It's just that the speed of extraction was somewhat slow. The entire mana extraction cost him another 3 bottles of mana spring. When Lin Yun stood up from the ground, The mana crystal of the rotten flower in his hand had already lost the last bit of luster. It felt like an ordinary stone. Lin Yun casually threw this empty mana crystal and lifted his hand to cast a light spell. The dark cave turned bright as daylight. The inside of the cave was filled with red fog, thicker than the outside. It felt as if it was being congealed there, and even the mana spring could only disperse the red fog in a few meters around him. Following the alchemist's notes, Lin Yun kept walking towards the depths of the cave for about 10 minutes, and sure enough, the path ahead became more spacious. Lin Yun knew that he was close to the place he was looking for. If the notes weren't wrong, then he only needed to move about 200 meters forward to reach the center of the cave. There, Lin Yun would be greeted by a tomb from the 3rd dynasty. Indeed, that was the second historical remain in the Poison Fog Canyon. Unlike the temple that Saus wanted to explore, this tomb would only be discovered a millennium later. The Cloud Tower would already be the strongest force of the kingdom, and a great mage born from the Cloud Tower would casually to a Poison Fog Canyon. But he would then encounter a fight at the entrance of the Poison Fog Canyon and would be severely injured. Relying on a few bottles of magic spring during his escape, he ultimately entered the unknown cave. No one knew what the great mage encountered in the cave. In any case, when he left the Poison Fog Canyon, he was holding a true spirit magic tool, that was an existence equivalent to an archmage. The enemy guarding the entrance of the Poison Fog Canyon didn't last more than 10 seconds in front of a true spirit magic tool and turned into a pile of ashes. Afterwards, the Great Mage returned to the Cloud Tower and wrote a report on his discovery. That report immediately caught the attention of the Cloud Tower, and 3 master alchemists came to the Poison Fog Canyon. They made a discovery at the location the Great Mage found the true spirit magic tool at. That discovery was somewhat lucky. Out of the 3 master alchemists, 2 were archmages and the last one was actually a great mage. And that great mage's magic rune was in fact the same magic array Lin Yun had been using. Originally, that great mage only had 2 arrays, but after studying in the Poison Fog Canyon for 3 months, that great mage had 5. He had the power to contest against a high mage with decent fighting strength. When Lin Yun had read that note, he had been quite surprised at that great mage's strange power-up. After all, the magic array could be said to be the most complex and most detailed magic rune. Every small upgrade needed quite a lot of investment. Even if the current Lin Yun's knowledge far surpassed that era's magic knowledge, if he wanted to upgrade his magic array from 2 to 5, it would take him 3 years. But that great mage took only 3 months. What kind of idea was that? This was the equivalent of a 12-fold shortening. This was the reason Lin Yun cared about the Poison Fog Canyon. In contrast, Lin Yun didn't have much hope for that spirit magic tool. After all, a true spirit magic tool was different from a spiritual magic tool. A spiritual magic tool only had some spirituality, and could keep fighting based on its relation with his owner. Intrinsically, it was still a magic tool. But a true spirit magic tool was different. A true spirit magic tool represented the pinnacle of alchemy. Any alchemist who managed to craft a true spirit magic tool could confer a soul to the magic tool. They were known as creators. Only 3 true spirit magic tools appeared at the peak of the magic civilization, and the alchemists who made these true spirit magic tools had supreme positions. Even heaven mages would lower themselves in front of them. After all, true spirit magic tools had genuine life of their own, that reached the very limit of alchemy. Each incarnation of a true spirit magic tool was different. To become the true master of the true spirit magic tool, one had to become its master by receiving the approval of the true spirit magic tool's incarnation. But in reality, there were almost no true spirit magic tool that wished to change its master. Apart from the alchemist that created them, they would almost never accept a second master. That great mage of the Cloud Tower must have had heaven-defying luck. That's the only possible explanation Lin Yun saw. He wondered if he would have such fate. Compared to an illusory true spirit magic tool, the reincarnation eye that was able to increase the amount of magic arrays from 2 to 5 was much more practical. Chapter 68, Tomb Surroundings. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. Under the protection of the magic spring, Lin Yun went a few hundred meters deep in the cave before finally finding the mentioned stone tablet. The stone tablet wasn't that imposing, however, Words in Nessa language were inscribed on it. It's actually Nessa characters. The inscription on the stone tablets brought some sort of shock to Lin Yun. There would be no issue with the Nessa runes being there if it was a newly built tomb. After all, it was already considered to be relatively widespread among mages. High mages and stronger mage powerhouses would usually study such Nessa runes. But this tomb was a tomb of the Third Dynasty. In the Third Dynasty, only the members of the royal family could understand the Nessa runes. That was a dynasty ruled by bloodlines. The ranks between different bloodlines were strict, and the mages who weren't part of the royal family, no matter how powerful or otherworldly they were, couldn't get a chance to learn the Nessa language. Only one outcome awaited them if they were found guilty of learning the Nessa language in secret: immediate execution. So it's a member of the Third Dynasty's royal family apostrophe. After a short surprise, Lin Yun's eyes fell onto the stone tablet once again. Although the inscription on top of the stone tablet was in Nessa language, it was far less complicated than the magic knowledge Lin Yun usually came in contact with. Thus Lin Yun spent less than 10 minutes to decipher the inscription on the stone tablet. From the stone tablet's inscriptions, the person buried there should be a prince who should have lived during the early stage of the Third Dynasty. It could be seen from some grammatical parts that were commonly used during that time. Lin Yun relied on those details to make an approximative guess of the tomb's origin. Strange, after reading the inscription, Lin Yun was filled with doubt. Normally, an ordinary tomb inscription would be a review of the tomb owner's life. Even if it wasn't detailed, it would surely carry some important bits of information. But this stone tablet didn't say anything about the prince's life. It was as if the prince's life was blank. However, Lin Yun understood after figuring out the identity of the tomb owner. No wonder such a shocking amount of wealth was hidden in a temple in the Poison Fog Canyon. The Third Dynasty's royal family believed in the Haber dragon god of war and power. Among Nocent's legends, the Haber dragon god was one of the two dragons at the birth of Nocent. It was in charge of war and power. Someone who obtained the favor of the Haber dragon god would have the power to triumph in every battle. The Haber dragon god's most loved offering was wealth. Whether it was dazzling gold or glistening gems, they would both make the Haber dragon god happy. How much care a follower would receive depended on how much wealth he would offer. A prince's offering to the Haber dragon god could naturally be described as outstanding. Thinking about this, Lin Yun was naturally looking forward to exploring this tomb. After all, the Third Dynasty was famous for their lavish burials. Even when a civilian died, they would be buried with all their savings, let alone members of the royal family. Every royal tomb could be considered a huge treasure. Who knew how many powerful mages became rich by being grave robbers during the peak of the magic era? Even a tomb of a member of the side branch of the royal family would make a high mage rich overnight. That was a crazy era. Almost no member of the Third Dynasty royal family would escape the fate of being disturbed by the livings. From emperor to prince, from duke to baron, people used this method to do an archaeological study of the Third Era's high society. That was a crazy era, but it was also an era that would make one rich overnight. During that era, mages began to make an inventory and discovered that Third Dynasty's royals amounted to almost half of Nocent's wealth. Once he was done reading the inscription, Lin Yun started carving all kinds of marks on the inside of the cave. Every Third Dynasty family royal tomb had fixed rules. These might be unknown to people of this era, but not to Lin Yun. This was due to those grave robbers during the peak of the magic era. They excavated nearly all of the Third Era's royal tombs. What kind of tomb were built for people of different status? What kind of rules were established for what kind of tomb? All of these secrets were already classified into a specialized school of magic knowledge, becoming a mage's essential knowledge at the time. Although Lin Yun didn't specialize in learning that kind of knowledge, he had seen countless explanations about it in the decaying library. It was to the point that he could easily figure out the layout of a prince's tomb. What Lin Yun had to do now was marking out the position of every room of the tomb. That should be the prince's resting place. I should leave it for later apostrophe. If it was an ordinary tomb, then the priority would be to dig up the dead's resting place, because that would be the place the tomb owner was sleeping in. and there would be buried the most precious items of the entire tomb. But the tomb he was now excavating was the tomb of a prince of the Third Era. Lin Yun clearly remembered that beside being extremely proficient in magic knowledge, they were also very good with bloodline curse magic. That was a power coming from their bloodline. The purest the bloodline, the stronger the spell power would be. Moreover, that power wouldn't disappear after their death, remaining lingering like a ghost. Countless of those grave diggers during the peak of the magic era died to that power. Lin Yun wasn't sure he could withstand this bloodline curse magic. I should first start with the surroundings apostrophe. Lin Yun made his decision and chose to first start with the outer part of the tomb. Usually, the tomb's surroundings wouldn't have items that were usually buried with the dead. However, it was also unlikely to be dangerous for the same reason. He was going to open up the tomb's surroundings first, but more importantly, he would make sure he could retreat any time. Nothing could be done about it. He only had 10 magic spring left in his bag, counting the ones he would have to use on his way back. He would only be able to stay 40 minutes here at most. With such a short time, even if Lin Yun entered the resting place of the prince, he would likely not have much gains. Rather than going on a wild goose chase, it would be better to first prepare a way out. That way, if he met any danger, he would be able to timely retreat. As for profits, it wasn't that urgent. From his talk with Saus, he gained 3 months. 3 months were enough to excavate the prince's tomb. Once he made a decision, Lin Yun quickly sprang into action. To be honest, for a powerful existence like a great mage, the matter of digging up a tomb was very simple. Even if Lin Yun didn't do the job himself, he unhurriedly chanted a few sentences to summon a few rock puppets. These stiff and slow elemental life forms were almost useless outside of providing cover during battle. However, they were extremely useful when it came to digging a grave. Rock puppets moved very slowly, but their strength couldn't be matched, and they would never tire. Lin Yun only needed to add a sharpness enchantment to the limbs of each puppet. With the help of the enchantment, the few rock puppets would quickly clear up the path leading to the core of the mountain. Lin Yun couldn't help shivering as he felt a gloomy cold wind blowing out of the passage. Suddenly, Lin Yun heard some mournful scream. It felt as if a ghost would rush out from the passage as a gloomy aura filled the mountain, trying to scare people. Thankfully, Lin Yun was prepared and let out a light spell he had been preparing. In a flash, the entire mountain was lit up with dazzling lights. The originally gloomy aura was swept clean in a split second. Once everything was over, Lin Yun sighed in relief. Lin Yun knew that it was the power of the bloodline curse. Each tomb of the royal family was protected by that kind of power. What affected Lin Yun a second ago was just a trace leaking from the tomb. He would be able to feel the true horror of that power once he went deeper in. Lin Yun didn't stop chanting after the light spell dispelled that sudden gloomy aura. Incantations kept coming out of Lin Yun's mouth. Lighten, haste, a few rock puppets. And once he was done he let off a mage vision, to make the puppet's vision temporarily linked to his own. Afterwards, Lin Yun passed down a few commands to the rock puppets. Several rock puppets entered the passage, and by relying on the floating effect of haste and lighten, he steadily left the tomb's surroundings. Lin Yun had summoned a total of 5 rock puppets. They didn't move together after entering the tomb's surroundings, but scattered instead. Each rock puppet explored one direction. And with the mage vision, Lin Yun was able to understand the layout of the entire tomb. Chapter 69. The End of the Hallway. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. The entire tomb was like a huge palace. 5 hasted rock puppets searched the surroundings for 10 minutes. They explored a small area, and just as Lin Yun thought, there was no harvest nor any danger. Apart from several signs of the place being from the 3rd dynasty, there was nothing noteworthy. After drinking another bottle of magic spring, Lin Yun assessed that he would only be able to maintain the rock puppet summoning for a few more minutes. He thought for a bit before deciding to interrupt mage vision and personally enter the tomb to take a look. The rock puppets had already made sure that there shouldn't be any danger in the passage. But before he could stop the channeled spell, the vision he got from one of the rock puppets had suddenly changed. What happened? The rock puppet field of view had changed so suddenly. Just a moment ago it was looking at a spacious and desolate area, but now it was a garden. It was a lush and verdant flower garden. Lin Yun frowned. He had never relaxed while looking through the 5 rock puppets' eyes, always remaining focused. Yet, in a split second, the sight changed without him noticing. Did it touch some spatial trap? It seemed unlikely. If it was a spatial trap, some spatial fluctuation would appear when the trap was triggered. Lin Yun was sure that he would have been able to detect these spatial distortions, regardless of how small they were. They would never escape his sight. But if it wasn't a spatial distortion, what was it? How could a large rock puppet suddenly change location on his watch? And in such a particular location? After all, the whole tomb was covered by the prince's bloodline curse. Even the passage leading to the tomb leaked some traces of the curse, which almost made a great mage like Lin Yun hallucinate. The power of the curse where the rock puppets were was 10 times stronger. How could a lush garden appear in a place filled with such a potent death energy? Hold on. Death energy apostrophe. Something suddenly flashed in Lin Yun's mind. This place. It couldn't be one of the legendary Death Garden. He had seen the words Death Garden in the notes of a necromancer. That necromancer was named Sandro. He was one of the 3 existences during the peak of the magic civilization who managed to conquer the undead plane. It even came to the point that very few people would dare to mention his name. Everyone would address him as Sovereign of Death. That Sovereign of Death once wrote about his youth in his notes. How he mistakenly entered a death garden and set foot on the necromancer path. Unfortunately, that Sovereign of Death didn't describe the death garden in details. He only mentioned that the death garden was a treasury left aside by the deads for the livings. It was a place full of endless opportunities and dangers. Nothing could be done about it. The notes that the Sovereign of Death left behind were mostly about his understanding of necromancy. There were only a few sentences about the death garden. But later on, the notes fell in the hands of other mages, and after changing hands quite a few times, it was put in the decaying library, before the era of mana exhaustion. When Lin Yun saw it, it was already filled with a lot of mages' comments and annotations. Among them were speculations about the Death Garden. There were several mages of different eras who believed that the Death Garden was born out of a large amount of death energy. It lay between true and false. It could exist. It could also be illusory. Not only were there a lot of dangers within, it also had various resources. When he read those notes, Lin Yun felt the content novel and interesting, but he didn't take it seriously. But now, the rock puppet's sudden change of environment made Lin Yun recall these notes. If that place was really a death garden. Thinking about it, Lin Yun had the rock puppet look at the surroundings, but his expression turned blank just as the puppet's head turned. He couldn't help smiling bitterly. He had suddenly lost connection with the rock puppet. Not just with the one that entered the death garden, but with all 5 of them. He didn't have to think much to understand that the summoning spell had reached its limit. It seemed that if he wanted to get to the bottom of it and explore the death garden, he had to go himself. Fortunately, the surroundings had already been explored by the puppets and no dangers had been found. The only thing he needed to pay attention to was the death garden. But that strange place existing between true and false couldn't be explained with common sense. In any case, he would only be able to understand it once he checked it. After making his decision, Lin Yun chanted a few spells. Haste and lighten. Lin Yun didn't rush in this time. He used some mana to cast a vine spell. Vine was a low-level spell with no fighting strength, but it had quite a few applications. Like when he had used it to get Fario out of the frozen swamp. Lin Yun's vine spell had a similar purpose, but instead of dragging someone out, he planned to drag himself out. If he met any danger, Lin Yun would only have to give a command and that vine would come from the entrance to smoothly extract him from the dangerous situation. Once this was done, Lin Yun lightly jumped, and with the floating momentum brought by Lighten, he flew above the ground of the tomb. The moment his feet touched the ground, Lin Yun felt the power of the bloodline curse. It was far thicker than the trace he had felt earlier. It attacked him the moment he touched the ground, and a strange scene appeared before his eyes. 10 women wearing white dress were standing around Lin Yun, laughing strangely. The ground under his feet was turning soft, just like a swamp. But when he looked down he only saw blood and limbs. He tried to struggle out of that bloody hell, But the strange laughter of those 10 white-dressed women filled Lin Yun's ears as they tried to drag him down to the depths of that bloody hell. Fuck off. Lin Yun coldly snorted. His right hand fluctuated as the mind defense he had prepared was sent out. In a flash, only a silver ripple came out. Whether it was the women or the bloody hell, they both instantly disappeared. Bloodline curses are truly vicious. Lin Yun wiped the sweat off his forehead. Even if he knew that it was all an illusion, that frightening scene still made Lin Yun somewhat fearful. An illusion targeting one's mind was one of the most dangerous. If he made a mistake, he would sink in a never-ending illusion and turn into a mindless corpse, forever unable to break off from the bloodline curse control. Although he had some defenses against mind attacks, Lin Yun still didn't dare to stay in this place for long. With the help of haste, Lin Yun only spent a few minutes before reaching the place the puppet had been at before the change happened. It's here. Lin Yun could clearly see the long hallway from his position. Both sides of the hallway were covered in thick stone walls which were adorned by a few light yellow oil lamps. No cold wind came from the hallway. If it wasn't for the flames flickering within the oil lamps, it would feel as if time had been frozen. Lin Yun's shadow was dragged pretty far by the oil lamps, swaying along the flickers of the lamps. Lin Yun took a deep breath before slowly walking forward. He knew the place the puppet had been at before its surroundings changed. The end of the hallway. A painting was hung at the end of the corridor. On the painting was a gorgeously dressed lady. But for some reason, Lin Yun felt that the eyes of the lady were focused on him and that her faint smile was trying to convey something. This feeling made Lin Yun more vigilant. Although Lin Yun hadn't stopped walking, his magic array was already prepared. 5 spells, 4 metamagics, ready to be used at any time. 50 meters, 40 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters. Lin Yun was getting closer to the end of the hallway. When Lin Yun stepped into the last 10 meters, those lamps suddenly got extinguished. In a flash, the entire hallway became pitch black as an ear-screeching laughter rose up. Lin Yun didn't think and instantly cast an ice wall, intercepting an attack. At the same time, the magic array activated and a huge mana fluctuation filled the hallway. A tempest of flames came out as Flame Storm was cast. This was the only great mage level spell that Lin Yun had merged into the magic array. Lin Yun was using his strongest firepower at this moment. Even the air seemed to combust under the pressure of the extreme heat. Thanks to the radiance of the flames, Lin Yun was finally able to clearly see. Long red hair had pierced his ice wall, and the lady in the painting was slowly coming out. Chapter 70. Ice and Fire. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. Lin Yun clearly saw the lady coming out of the painting. Her bright eyes had turned into soul fire, blood slowly falling down from her eye sockets, leaving behind bloody marks on her beautiful face. Her long red hair was like red snakes, emitting some hissing sounds. A cold wind blew through the hallway, carrying a hoarse and sinister laughter. In an instant, the hallway was filled with a thick bloody smell. Blood Banshee? Lin Yun frowned. Although he already knew that the painting was strange, he never expected it to be that strange. That was a Blood Banshee. Even among undead life forms, Blood Banshees were known for their evil ways. Every Blood Banshee had inevitably experienced endless pain and torture. It was said that they suffered enough torture for their souls to be completely ripped apart before they could transform into a vicious ghost and mature into a Blood Banshee. They were level 16 at the very least and had all kinds of abilities. Even peak-grade mages weren't willing to deal with Blood Banshees. Even if they ended up winning, it wouldn't be without a cost. So unlucky. Lin Yun inwardly cursed. He didn't stop moving his hands, doing a few gestures and controlling the storm of flames to block the Blood Banshee's attacks. Lin Yun's magic array had merged a total of 4 metamagics and 5 spells, of which Flame Storm was the only great mage level spell. Under the effect of the magic array, that Flame Storm's might was already approaching high rank. But Lin Yun clearly knew that even if this Flame Storm could pin down the Blood Banshee for some time and give her some injuries, it still wouldn't be able to kill the Blood Banshee. The Blood Banshee was an undead life form. Her power originated from her soul shattering. She might dread flames and loathe light, but the only way to kill a Blood Banshee was to destroy that shattered soul. Sure enough, Lin Yun's Flame Storm forced the Blood Banshee in a corner. Within the crazily rotating storm, Countless flames were burning the Blood Banshee's body. Due to the magic array's strengthening, the might of each flame wasn't inferior to a flame burst. But it only caused the Blood Banshee to let out a blood-curdling scream. Lin Yun felt pain even with his mind protection. That was the scream of the Banshee, directly attacking the mind and soul. If it had been in Thousand Sails City, that scream would have been enough to kill hundreds of people. The hallway still felt shaky after the Banshee scream was over. Countless lamps had fallen from the stone walls, and cracks had appeared on Lin Yun's ice wall. No wonder no one is willing to provoke a Blood Banshee. Lin Yun was frowning. The Blood Banshee was such a strange life form. It really was nauseating. Even if his mind defenses could withstand the scream, the intensity almost made him deaf. Lin Yun flame storm exploded up when the Banshee's scream shattered his ice wall. Bright flames flew as a rumbling sound echoed. The might of that explosion was far more astonishing than the previous flame bursts and fire arrow rain. However, Lin Yun's expression became heavy. He had noticed the shadow flitting across the flames. That was naturally the shadow of the Blood Banshee. The hallway lost its only source of light after the explosion of the flame storm, plunging in the darkness once again. Lin Yun's reaction could be considered quite fast, a light spell immediately following the descent in darkness. But the Blood Banshee's speed was far faster than Lin Yun. Lin Yun only heard a gust of wind as the shadow swept over. Before the light could blossom, a red snake was already flying over. Only a bang could be heard as the light and that red snake exploded together. The long hallway was once more covered in darkness. So fast Lin Yun's heart tightened. He hurriedly put up an ice fire shield. A blue and red radiance firmly guarded Lin Yun. Lin Yun knew that this kind of dark area was the preferred fighting environment of undead life forms, especially for a frightening monster-like existence such a Blood Banshee. Once in the dark, their fighting strength would be doubled. This was too disadvantageous to himself. The only thing Lin Yun could do right now was using the ice fire shield to protect himself, and wait until the magic array spell combination was completed. The Blood Banshee launched her real attack when the magic array combined the spells. Her monster-like speed even made Lin Yun, who had been using a magic array, merged haste. Breathless, the red and blue radiances flickered very fast as the ice and fire shields started being overworked. Gasping breath, frantic roars. That dark hallway felt like one of those monster arena. The Blood Banshee's sharp nails ripped through the air, leaving behind some sharp sounds. Lin Yun simply didn't have the time to cast a spell. He could only rely on his ice fire shield to protect himself, only able to instant cast one or two spells from time to counterattack. That was Lin Yun. If it was another first-rank great mage, he or she would have already died under the hands of the Blood Banshee. That was aberration among undead life forms. Even a peak great mage might not be willing to rashly provoke such a life form. They not only had monster-like speed, they also had all kinds of abilities that could target one's mind and soul. This was a nightmare for mages. Only someone like Lin Yun, someone with so much battle experience that they couldn't gain more, would be able to force a Blood Banshee in a stalemate in a dark and tight hallway. At this moment, Lin Yun entered a state of extreme composure. Darkness, restricted space and extremely aggressive Blood Banshee, it was as if those didn't exist. Lin Yun's mind was entirely focused on the ice fire shield. The two flickering radiance had already exceeded the ice fire shield's limit. Regardless how fierce the Blood Banshee offensive was, the ice fire shield would always appear at the right place at the right time. Countless red snakes, lightning-fast sharp nails, none of those managed to reach Lin Yun. Every attack was intercepted by the ice fire shield. The entire fight kept going for no less than 10 minutes. After Lin Yun drank another bottle of magic spring, he finally merged two spells with a meta magic. It's time to reverse the tide. Lin Yun smiled. The flame barrier he had prepared a while ago was cast. The high-temperature flames forced the Blood Banshee away, giving enough time for Lin Yun to start his first incantation of the fight. The incantation wasn't very long, but it was strangely divided into two parts. One was the flame spear, while the other was the frost lance. Fire and ice, two opposite type of magic, appeared in the same spell. If it came out, all of Noscent would be shocked. This was considered impossible. Even the ice-fire shield, which could be considered to be a spell of ice and fire, was in fact just a channeling of both the ice shield and fire shield. Ice magic and fire magic were two diametrically opposed extremes. Only an archmage could operate both at the same time. Even high mage couldn't do it because their power was insufficient to curb the conflict between the two powers. That kind of conflict was no joke. A moment of carelessness and the mana would collapse. High mages couldn't do it, let alone great mages. But now, blue light flickered in his left hand, a dazzling red light in his right hand. This was a sign of convergence between two types of magic power. This was an extremely strange scene. And yet it was happening in the tomb of a prince of the Third Dynasty. This was all because Lin Yun's magic conducting rune was the magic array. Two spell of completely different attributes merged with the meta-magic elemental burst. That explosion of power far surpassed the previous flame storm. This wasn't the might of a single spell, but the might of the magic array, one of the most powerful magic conducting rune in the magic civilization. It was revealing its might at this moment. Flame Spear, Frost Lance, completely merged in the magic array. The moment Lin Yun chanted the spell, a dazzling light shone in the dark hallway. It was followed by a blood-curdling scream. This wasn't a banshee scream aimed at his mind or soul, but the last scream of the banshee. Silence filled the hallway. The soul fire turned bright once more as snake after snake died, turning into beautiful red hair once again. The bloody scar on her face disappeared, revealing her beautiful face on again. Finally, the blood banshee turned into a black mist and returned to the painting. Lin Yun let out a relieved breath. This fight could be said to be the hardest fight ever since Lin Yun transmigrated. The blood banshee's threat was far higher than anything he met before. But, after a tough fight, it was time for the rewards. Lin Yun picked up the soul essence left on the ground. That was the crystallization of the blood banshee's shattered soul. The mana contained within far surpassed the mana contained in the rotten flower's mana crystal. Most importantly, the soul essence of the blood banshee was very likely to retain some of the blood banshee abilities. It would give him great benefits on his magic path if he was able to study it carefully. But to Lin Yun, what was more important was the death garden behind the blood banshee. Lin Yun clearly remembered that there was one reason why Chandra was called the Sovereign of Death, that powerful necromancer's control over undead life forms was far higher than his peers. Chandra never told anyone how he gained this ability, but many mages guessed. Chandra's ability most likely came from the Death Garden,